Hey, President. It's really good to be here. Good morning to you all. Happy Juneteenth. Uh, is this a good time to begin, President Mark?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I should be able to share my screen, right? I'd like to use a PowerPoint for part of the presentation. Thank you all. I'll try to pay attention to the time. I believe I have 20 minutes to speak and a few minutes after that for questions. As some of you may be aware, the club that I was formerly a member of, the Rotary Club of Georgetown, and Dr. Vasconcelos have had a close relationship. We've collaborated on several projects, and he visited us there many times. The club I'm a member of is brand new, just like yours, and experiencing the same thing. I'm trying to navigate the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's particularly difficult for a new club. For many of us, though, we were together before, so we know each other well, we work well. Liz, who is here with me as a past president of that club as well, an extremely passionate Rotarian, and she's actually been the leader of a project called the Green Thrive. I'm wearing a t-shirt. I don't know if you can see it. And we just launched the other day, so we're particularly proud of it. Now, for a new club, it's good to get these things under your belt and get going. Every, I would say, 5 years or so, I have a sort of existential crisis where I go through something which changes the way I see the world. Unfortunately, it's not usually for the better. I usually stumble upon some sort of obvious hypocrisy that, in my youth I never thought about. I realize that the world is not really what I'd like it to be. And when Mark invited me a while ago and we spoke about it more recently, he was at my office while I was dealing with a case that had come to me from a colleague, which concerned climate change. It has been causing me sleepless nights for the past few months. Honestly, I'd really rather not do it, but when I read through the papers, there's really nothing that I could find that I disagreed with, and it's one of those things that falls upon you that you have to step up to. So, unfortunately, you found me in the midst of a very real problem. And I think it ties into my Rotary experience and how we as Rotarians navigate the world and what we can do to make it a better place. I'll take you through this slide and pause in between to explain some of the ideas that we were talking about. So if you give me a second to load it. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Excellent. So these are really thoughts of mine that don't necessarily reflect, that of my Rotary Club. I'm not sure everybody would agree with me, as I'm sure Rotarians worldwide would find a reason to disagree on some of the things I'm talking about. So for those of you who don't know, Guyana is on the South American coast. I found this image last night, which shows Guyana imposed on the East Coast, which you're all familiar with, to give you an idea of the size of the country. Now, a country this size, you would expect would have a lot of people, but it's really just 750,000 people scattered across the top of the country, what's called the coast. And a good bit of those people are also in and around the capital city of Georgetown. About a third of the country lives in Georgetown or comes into Georgetown almost every day. The entire coast is below sea level, 6 feet below sea level, and rely on an interconnected system, if you can call it a system, of canals and rivers and so on that help to drain the coast. What happens is that when the tide is high, we have to seal off those canals and drains. And so the water, if there's heavy rainfall, the water stays until the tide is gone and goes out. Now this works, well, has worked well enough for long enough that we have come to think that it can work forever, but increasingly we're finding that it's failing badly. This image here shows the object in the bottom is called a coca, and they're found at the ends of some of the large canals I refer to. And the coca is sealed with a physical barrier. In olden days, it would be a combination of wood and concrete. But you found that in this particular area, the coastline has retreated by maybe close to a quarter mile. And so the cocas that was fine maybe 100 years ago is now stranded out in the ocean. The bush that you see in the top is mangroves, which help to protect the coastline and built-up areas because they provide a natural sea defense. We at one time had some trouble with cutting down mangroves, but we're doing less and less of that now as we recognize the value of them. The problem though is that the mangroves undergo a series of natural accretion where they retreat and build up over time. And so it's very difficult to rely on that exclusively. This is a image of an area closer to the city where many of us live. And this happens increasingly. The wall you see is loosely called a seawall. It's a concrete and steel structure that's built up on the coast. So it should go up about maybe as much as 10, 15 feet above the sea to give you a barrier. But in high tides, the water just comes over the top. And this can cause flooding in areas close by. Many areas don't even have this sort of wall or mangroves. And so the water just washes over when the tide is high, which happens increasingly frequently. Recently, as in the last couple of weeks, we've had high rainfall, exceptionally high rainfall, and so a lot of areas have been flooding. This is an area called Maikoni, where the farmlands are underwater. As you would expect, it takes quite a bit of money to prepare farms for planting or even to maintain cattle. When it floods like this, it takes years and years and years to recover. The farmer goes into debt, and of course all the problems that go with that sort of thing. Unlike rich countries, you don't have a system of crop insurance or any sort of central government formal assistance, so people are particularly vulnerable to the consequences of bad weather. These are cows struggling in the area to find high ground. This is an area further in the interior. So the unique thing about the flooding in the last month is that it isn't just the coastal area, it's also areas that are pretty high up that are inundated as well. This is a farm I visited about a year ago. I was pretty impressed by the level of this relatively simple but adequate drainage and irrigation the farmer had. And in this small area, of course, it's bigger than what you're seeing in the image. You would have lost, I would say, easily 100,000 US dollars in the space of a week. And again, no system of insurance. This is an area I've been doing a case on recently called Danzig on the coastline. The strips of land you see are family lands that are rice farms, about 50 to 100 acres each. And the family's been having an internecine war over it for the last 20 years. Unfortunately, though, the sea has taken over the land and nobody's going to be planting any rice there for another 10 years. And given that this now happens every 3 to 4 years, chances are the land can no longer be used for agriculture, at least not for rice. I might be able to find something else. Of course, the efforts when you have these things, government sends out contractors to try to buffer up the coastal line. This is in the ocean. It's not enough. It's not going to work. We can't push back Mother Nature. This is another high area called Kokwani. The two pictures show what it was 2 months ago, and the one on the right a few weeks ago. And of course, as these things happen, the burden falls heaviest on people who are less equipped to deal with it or to recover from it. So, apart from the work I was describing, which began before the recent floods, the environmental case, we've had this as well, which is becoming increasingly obvious that this is something that will happen not just every 20 years, every 30 years, but will probably happen every 3 to 5 years. And so it changes the way that economic activity can be organized, the things that can be done practically to earn a living. So, as mentioned before, our club is brand new, and we decided to become a cause-based club, adopting the seventh area of focus announced by Rotary International quite recently. Many of us are former Rotarians, and fortunately, we were able to attract a lot of former Rotaractors who had sort of aged out of Rotaract when that was still a thing, but were still very keen on Rotary as an idea, but had not yet found their way into another club. They were attracted by our club, by the flexibility we offered, by the fact that they'd get to join a new club and probably create a culture of their own, rather than fitting into one of the existing clubs with their own systems and cultures and so on. And so it's been going really well so far. We got our chart on the 17th of September. We were told that it was approved, I think, a week later. And past President Liz submitted our first district grant 2 days later, which we got immediately as a brand new club. A lot of the reason for it is that quite a few of us were known to district officers. We've been engaging with them in the lead up. A few of us were members of the Paul Harris Society, and we could demonstrate that even though we're brand new, we really should be treated as equals with other more established clubs because we knew what we were doing. And fortunately, the district agreed. And the project I described, the Green Tribe project that Liz led, was launched quite recently. It's quite a huge success. So the idea that Rotary is only now considering a cause of protecting the environment is a bit astonishing, given that this has been a major global issue for such a long time. And it joins other areas of focus for Rotary, promoting peace, fighting disease, clean water and sanitation, maternal and child health, etc. And of course, the work does with Rotary, with the Polio Foundation, and other work in disaster response. I've gone through the Rotary International website and identified some of the things that Rotary has highlighted as being part of its efforts to spur innovation and generally to help to meet the challenge of climate change and environmental degradation. What I found, unfortunately, is that we're still fairly timid about it, and so the work so far is it's going a bit slowly, if I may say so. But Rotary International highlights the work already being done by its Peace Fellows in this area, and I think there's room for optimism that it will grow from here. And they've described on their website quite a few good projects that Rotary already does and supports worldwide. The education of girls and family planning are, of course, very important in meeting climate change because they help to meet some of the challenges with managing the growth in population. Of course, the more people you have, the more greenhouse gases, etc. And so the idea that we stabilize the growth in population is a good one. And Rotary talks about future work it may do in regenerative agriculture, forestry rejuvenation, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, the language being used, as I said, is quite timid. It isn't being regarded as the sort of existential crisis that I think it is. Unfortunately, like many other important issues, climate changes in many places a matter of opinion or a matter of politics or worldview, and it isn't really regarded as being the black and white issue of science that most persons who study it point out that it is. Rotary, I think, recognizing that within its ranks, it may have quite a few members who may find the idea of a radical approach to climate change offensive as being fairly non-confrontational about it. So one of the things that I asked my club when we decided to become a cause-based club, an environmental club, is what exactly do you regard as environmental issues? Um, and I have somewhat crudely lumped it into two categories. I mean, the first I've described as environment-like, and these are things that nobody is going to complain about. The sort of obvious problems of having congested cities with smoke and all the things that go with it, or having a factory next to you, which causes noise pollution. Um, Issues of how solid waste is disposed, the promotion of recycling, etc. Beautification projects, and like in Guyana, things to tackle flooding and drainage. And these are things that are fairly easy to do or to promote and are unlikely to cause controversy or any great dislocation in anybody's club or communities. It gets a bit more difficult, as you look at the big ticket issues, and I'm sure if there are scientists among you who can do a much better job in defining them. But I've put a list together for you to consider, and these are real problems. So climate change really is the biggest environmental issue. And I think it's a bit difficult for Rotary International to identify the environment as a cause and yet be timid on climate change. The main reason why is that climate change is sort of urgent. I think since after the Second World War, with the increased industrialization worldwide, and the growth in the fossil fuel industry, it has been known that the activities that man engages in are having an effect on the world around us. In Guyana, we have recently discovered oil, and so the major player or the face of the industry is Exxon. And I've read reports from Exxon, going back to the 70s and 80s, where they identify that climate change, and some of the language is different, of course, from how it's being described in 2021. But the oil industry has known that its activities are harmful, and so it's sort of odd to see, as many other issues, that this becomes a question of opinion and not a question of fact. I mean, if the person doing it acknowledges that what they're doing is harmful, there really isn't much room for somebody to say, well, I don't think so, I don't believe so. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in. Uh, a couple notes on what climate change really means. The effect of it is that it increases the temperature of the atmosphere, and the main gas that is released that considered among greenhouse gases is carbon dioxide. You hear a lot of talk about clean energy, and sometimes this includes natural gas. But natural gas releases methane, which is even more harmful than carbon dioxide. Also, although the effects of methane dissipates after a couple of decades, but given the state we're at with climate change, we really don't have decades. So I, for one, am not convinced that natural gas is going to solve anybody's problem. In fact, the idea that you're going to quote it as clean energy is, forgive the pun, a bit of a gaslighting of the issue. I mean, the only way to stop it, scientists agree, is to become net zero in the production of carbon. The only way to do it is to stop using fossil fuels. Um, and of course, things like controlling industrial agriculture, deforestation, and of course, making sure that manufacturing is climate friendly. If this doesn't happen the way it's supposed to happen, meaning that we cap greenhouse gas emissions and start to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, you're going to find that vast sections of the planet become uninhabitable. Not merely because like low-lying areas like Guyana were flooded, it just gets too hot for humans and animals to survive. Uh, Nobody's quite sure exactly what will happen, but it's going to be pretty bad. Um, and 7 billion people fighting over clean water, food, and places to live is probably going to get really nasty. We know for sure that Ghana and many other places in the Caribbean and other small countries are unable to deal with the rising sea levels and the effects of climate change on their economies or their lives and livelihoods. So there have been a series of international agreements, the Kyoto Protocol, which deals with carbon trading, and the Paris Agreement in 2015. The Paris Agreement has been a bit controversial, I think, in US politics in the last 4 or 5 years, and it will probably likely to remain so. I mean, the truth is that, as long as vast numbers of people earn their livelihood from the fossil fuel industry, it's going to be difficult for politicians to tell them that we're shutting you down. Um, so these are the things that can mitigate climate change. They sound really nice and it's easy to talk about them, but they're very expensive, and to get them done requires radical change in the way we organize our lives, what we consume, how we live, etc. So the reason why this is particularly interesting for Ghana is that we have relied largely on extractive industries for much of our time, especially post-independence in 1966. The traditional extractives, gold, diamond, bauxite, timber, are all ecological disasters. Um, but they take place far away from the coast. And so for the most part, we don't see them. And unless something major happens, like cyanide pond breaks and you have hundreds of millions of gallons of cyanide into one of the rivers, it's not something we really think about. There's also a lot of the fishing offshore. It's not necessarily being done by Guyanese artisanal fishermen, and not being done in a sustainable way. The monocrop culture is a problem, but it's not as bad as in other places. A lot of the areas are not really built up, so you aren't cutting down forests to agriculture as yet, although that's starting to happen in some areas. The biggest problem is our new industry. The problem with the oil and gas industry is that it promises that we're all going to get really rich and really happy. And that's not likely to happen. A few people will get rich, but at what cost? The reason why I found this particularly disturbing is that prior to 2015, we spent a lot of time and money convincing the world that we were committed to the environment. Our former president earned the title Champion of the Earth. We received, I think, perhaps almost $100 million from Norway on the various projects to preserve the forests and so on. We amended our constitution to provide for the environment being one of the fundamental freedoms, along with the right to life, etc. That people have a right to a clean and safe environment. And there's really no question in my mind that our new industry is incompatible with this. But unfortunately, this is a controversial view because The country has a GDP of about 13,000 US per year, which is better than many places, but pretty bad. We have high, very high rates of maternal deaths, infant mortality, education is not optimal, there are security issues, of course, there are the pre-existing climate change issues like sea defense and drainage and so on. Now, the idea is that all of these things take money, and if you reject the opportunity to make money, then you're sort of ridiculous. That's the way it is. So I think one of the biggest obstacles in many places, of course, is the acceptance that this is a problem. So of course, promoting education awareness is a good start. Working with communities affected by climate change. You may want to do projects in schools or with children or with persons who are already affected. And Rotary, I think increasingly will find it necessary to be probably less diplomatic about the issue, and we'll have to work to find ways to treat it with the urgency it requires. The problem with all of this is that I really don't know what my club should do. So we are an environmental club, but I suspect we are going to be challenged to define what sort of environmental club we want to be. Are we going to be the polite environmental club and pick up garbage? Or are we going to run the risk of being offensive and challenge the big ticket items of our day? Unfortunately, Rotary really isn't a place that challenges issues that have controversy. And so it remains to be seen. But I know that all of us in this room are young enough that we're going to be alive to see how this plays out. And it's no longer a 10, 15, 20-year problem, it's a today problem. So I think we're going to be talking about this quite a bit. And so, President Mark, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I wish I had answers.